Welcome back to the Keeping Current podcast from ERS and HVM, designed to plug you into the world of electrical power systems. I'm your host, Nick Palko, and I'm excited to be joining as a co-host this season. Today we're kicking off a new series focusing career development and the next generation of engineering professionals entering our industry. Today we have Dallas Kaylor from HVM joining us. Dallas began his career on the engineering side of the business and has since transitioned into a customer-facing role where he helps organizations solve reliability and maintenance challenges. Dallas, welcome to the show, bud.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So Dallas and I started this conversation, you and I started this conversation in Arizona about doing this podcast about a month ago. And I know, like me, you came from an inside sales background and actually went to outside, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I started at inside sales probably it's about 3 years ago now today. And yeah, started there, had a lot of mentorship throughout there. One of my mentors around the Dayton area in the Columbus area, he always said that, which may be a little biased. He was an inside sales guy as well, but he always said the best ones always start out at inside sales. So that's where I started as well.
So it's funny because you've heard me say this story. Like when I started, I was a generator guy, rental sales generator guy for the first 10 years of my career. And I initially, my background is I have an industrial tech degree from Central Connecticut up here in Connecticut. And I thought my program was developed to go do quality assurance and quality checks on essentially like military equipment and turbines for one of the big manufacturers up, military contractors up here. And I went the exact opposite because I had a diesel background. I agree, and I think it's a culture thing too, where I think when you bring guys in and you kind of get them involved with the actual business side of things, it makes life so much easier because you see everything on the back end. So then when you go into the field, there's a whole nother, there's a bunch of checks and balances that you'll do as a person because you know the functions of the job. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, it makes the transition a lot more smooth, is what I'd say about that. Yeah.
so here's a question that I always love because what I thought I was going to do when I got out of school was totally different than what I do for a living now. So when you were in school, did you see yourself doing what you're doing today, or did you have a totally different vision?
Yeah, so when I first started looking into engineering, I originally thought I'd be more along the lines of, especially being in mechanical, along the lines of designing parts for machines, most likely automotives or military stuff. It's what I know. A lot of mechanicals that I do know, they go into those fields as it's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the most common for a mechanical. So that's kind of what I pictured when I first looked into engineering.
I think when you're in college, a lot of your advisors and teachers they paint this picture of what they think you're going to do, and then everybody does something different. At the time when I was in my early 20s, I wasn't really big into electrical. Now, I can pretty much wire anything and figure out everything electrically, so it's kind of cool. What's something you learned that would surprise the average person day in and day out?
Yeah, so what really surprised me is the amount of maintenance and the importance of it and the value it
Mm-hmm.
has to maintaining that equipment because I see that stuff every day. It doesn't seem to change to me, but being in this role, knowing how often that stuff needs maintained, how much it could affect someone's life or
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
business, that's kind of like the biggest surprise to me because you never really think about that stuff failing because you don't see it. You just think it
Yep.
exists as a normal person. It's just there. But realistically, you got to have your maintenance done. You need your routine checkups on everything. Sometimes stuff gets replaced or upgraded. And as the average person, it was more like it's there, it exists. And once it's built, it's just kind of, sitting there. So that was probably the
Mm-hmm.
biggest
Mm-hmm.
surprise to me is just the amount of maintenance and hours that are actually put into things that you just think are always there.
Or even to your point, massive snowstorm hits or a hurricane hits and everybody loses power in a region, right? Well, nobody understands that, you know, what it really takes to get everything back online when something major happens either. So it's one of those things where, until you don't have it, people don't really get it, so to speak. So all right, here we're going to transition a little bit. Going from an engineer to a trusted advisor role, which is always fun because like I've been doing this for 20, I think it'll be 22 this year. So I laugh because I get a lot of customers on the call me and go, hey, Nick, what do you think about this? Or what should we do about that? Or what's that transition for you look like from going from like being a book, and I always say book engineer, to somebody who's been in the field and you start gathering more information and things like that. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, so I have actually. So one thing coming into this area, the Dayton area was already somewhat developed area. So I had previous customers as before from the last person that had this territory
Mm-hmm.
at HVM. So coming into that role, I do see a lot of like the long-term customers we've had for years come to me and they'll be like, "Hey, I have this, this, and this. How should we go about this, like planning wise, stuff like that?" Which isn't really something that we necessarily do, but I need to help them get in front of the right people that can do it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
some of it, I won't lie, has been pretty tough just because I don't have all of the connections yet. So trying to
Mm-hmm.
grow that network of vendors and different companies I can trust
Yep.
to
Yep.
give to my customer so that the
Yep.
way they can trust me has been it's a it's definitely an uphill battle, but as you get more, it seems like that helps you as a sales engineer. That kind of just grows your territory and your customer base even more because you're trusted by someone else.
Well, and it's almost a two-way street. Is something I'll say to you. Like with me, I learned early on. Every salesperson talks great and says, "Hey, we can do this, that, and the third, right?" Where the rubber really meets the road, and you'll learn this as you keep going. That like there's certain people you will trust with your life. You know what I mean? And then there's guys you'll be like, maybe I don't want to call this one, or I don't want to deal with that one. Whatever the reason is, you'll get there. You're almost you almost have to sell yourself in this role because we don't sell widgets every day. That's what I say to Nabil, who's coming on next month. You ever have problems like where because you're younger, you're like, oh, what do I know? And I always say this, like, don't sell yourself short because a lot of times, what you know is leaps and bounds from the average person only because what you've gone through or what you've done inside at HVM. You know what I mean? So, I think you guys as younger engineers sometimes don't know what you have in your head until you actually use it. You know what I mean? What's something you learned about customers that you couldn't have learned sitting in a classroom?
I would say probably building a network and connecting. That's probably the biggest thing I'd say.
I always say one of the things I always say that's always carried me throughout my career is my internal network of people. And it's one of those things where nobody can teach you that. You know what I mean? Like they don't teach you that in school. It's like, oh, well, you need to network with everybody. You either have it or you don't. And it's funny because some engineers have problems connecting personally with people, right? Because they see amps, hertz, volts. They don't see the flesh and blood in front of them, and it's kind of wild. As somebody early in your career, what do you think younger professionals are looking for today when they're coming out of school?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see from people coming out is finding not just like a field that they enjoy in a company that they like, but finding a place where there's multiple paths
Yep.
to grow. I see a lot of people I know in college move from different job to different job sometimes because there's not a lot of opportunity to grow in that company, so there's not a whole lot of reason to stay there. There's so many different pathways that I can grow in my career, and I've had those discussions, and that's the other thing is having people in the company that are easily accessible to you.
Yep.
I've had conversations with you all the time. People, we're not even in the same state, but if I call you, you're going to answer. And I think that's a big thing.
Yep.
I've
Yep.
had conversations about growth with my managers, with our GM, stuff like that. And that's something you don't see in every company.
Also, one thing what I've always seen here since I've been here, there's a culture here that you don't see in other companies, and I think it's because a lot of the guys that you and I both work with day in and day out, there's a longevity that's been here for a very long time, And because of the camaraderie with the amount of time that these guys have all spent with each other, you know what I mean? And it kind of rubs off. And you know, like we saw it in Arizona, like where, you know, it rubs off because all these guys, you know, it's like infectious. Like you just kind of, you see them doing it and you kind of want to be part of that and kind of, but it's a culture thing. You know what I mean? So and I would say like culture's everything when it comes to building a team, a sales team, management team, anything. It's culture is everything. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge, especially because it feels like here, we have different service centers. I'm in Dayton,
yep,
stuff like that. We got the Indy, but at other companies, you just kind of work within your location. Where here, I'm on the phone with Indy, I'm on the phone with Milwaukee with you, and so
yep.
like there's a lot more. It feels like a lot bigger group, but still very personal.
What's something you think companies can do better to attract and develop young talent?
For the most part, I think it's more of a lot of companies just need to get out in front of them. You know, we have when I was at Trine University, we had the career fair, and I saw multiple different companies, but it seemed like the same group of companies every single year.
Yep.
So, getting out in front of people as they're in college, and they're trying to figure out that career path, and maybe if you're, you know, even though Trine was engineering, mostly an engineering school, a lot of the stuff we did was a lot of the companies, they were looking at for engineering roles.
Yep.
Even though like you're looking for engineering roles, still try to pull in some people for different roles that are within your company, even though that's not necessarily what you went looking for.
Yep.
Because I know when I was going to every single one of those career fairs, not a single company had talked about engineering sales. It was a little bit harder to find that role to apply for or like talk to people about it. It wasn't, kind of out there as much from
And was it
companies.
because a lot of the companies that were approaching you were big 8,000 pound gorillas that wanted to kind of mold you into what they wanted, or was it just little companies that had visions of what they wanted and wanted you to fit that? Is
It
the way I'll
was
ask it.
majority of it was just companies had their vision of what they wanted, and
Yep.
so that's what they were, putting out there as advertisement for. So, and a lot of it was, local companies kind of close to there. There were some like steel mills and stuff like that. Um, and they were specifically just looking for, mechanical. Well, they have chemical engineers, they
Yeah.
have, you know, so that part of it,
CNC operators, things like that, guys like that.
yeah.
Yeah. What's one misconception people have about engineers?
I think the biggest misconception with people with engineers is a lot of people don't when they think of an engineer, they only think of, that really smart individual who's, maybe a little more antisocial, keeps to themselves and just,
Yeah.
wants to be behind a desk all day.
Yeah.
From my time being an engineer, I'm not like that either. That was one of the reasons I went into sales. And that was one of my struggles in college was trying to figure out that role because, to me, although that's what, I'm shown as what engineers should be, is, this person that's making parts or whatever behind a desk all day. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really, I kind of lost interest in doing that by the time I was ready to graduate. So I think that's the biggest misconception because I met a lot of engineers there and now meeting a lot of people that are engineers that are a lot more outgoing and like people person,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest misconception.
Best career advice you've received so far?
The best career advice I've probably received so far would be um, just understanding that, you know, people want to help the young guy. Like that was one of the hardest things to learn inside sales. Like, don't feel bad about asking, like even to customers. Like I understand you guys want to help me here in my company, but learning that, this older guy that's a customer of mine, he knows more than I do at the end of the day. He's been in the the role for a long time. He's been around this stuff for a long time. So if I have a question that I don't understand something, asking him, they're more than happy to, teach the younger people and kind of show them what they know because they're proud of that. So that was kind of the best advice I've received so far is, go to everybody that, anyone that's older and that's been in the career, don't be afraid to be the one that asks questions. Like, don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone a little bit. Nobody expects you to know everything. If you do know everything, that's probably a problem. And yeah, that's probably the one thing I wish I knew, because there was definitely times when I first started out where I didn't want to be the person in the room that didn't know, but I didn't know, and I should have asked.
I had an old timer who I worked with who was a 30-year union electrician, and he wasn't an electrician, he was a field engineer. Eric used to tell me all the time, Nick, the day you and I stop learning, we should retire. Because as the industry evolves, we continue to have to learn and keep going and learning everything that changes with the environments that we're in every day. So it's I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, especially with all the advances with like AI and data centers and stuff like that. I know so many guys in our company are near the age of retirement, and I'll be talking to them about something they just learned about this stuff. Crazy how much there is to know, and everything's different. Every customer site's different. Every piece of equipment's different. So no matter where you are, there's going to be something you don't understand or don't know at the time.
Well, Dallas, thanks, brother. Thanks for joining me today and sharing your experience with everything. One thing that I'll say that I always feel like it stands out, engineering careers, and I said this before, nothing in this career is ever linear. And, between technical work, field experience, customer engagements, things like that, there's always opportunities to grow and make, between growing as a person, growing in your network, growing everything. So, throughout your career, you're going to go through tons of different, hurdles and challenges and things that will change every day in and day out. But, just want to say thank you, Dallas, for coming on and,
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
No problem, Dallas. For those listening, this is the first installment of Early Professional Series, where we'll continue exploring the experiences, challenges, and opportunities shaping the future for our workforce. Thank you for listening to Keeping Current. We'll see you next time.